ultimate objective is the businessmen, the SMEs that the chambers have in their membership. We help the chambers so they can help their membership and provide more service.
Reflections of a world that called for decisive action from all stakeholders to forge a positive path for development in the face of vast challenges and uncertainties.
By breaking down the barriers to free trade and developing the economies of poor nations, the International Chamber of Commerce believes the world will be a stronger and better place to live. The group that originally referred to itself as the Merchants of Peace is looking to spread its vision around the globe.
Arbitration has become the favorite, if not really the exclusive way of dealing with disputes in the international field.
Daniel, com você.
Okay. Good morning. Welcome to ICC, this amazing institution that was created 100 years ago to bring prosperity through the expansion of global trade. The founders of ICC used to call themselves Merchants of Peace. This is the true spirit of ICC and our gathering. It is a great pleasure to host this panel with such a distinguished business leaders, who I thank on behalf of ICC for accepting our invitation. It is great pleasure to be here hosting the first ICC Leadership Talk, a series of high-level strategic debates on the global topics that will shape the future of our society and business worldwide. It is only starting this series by discussing the role of sustainability and how private sector can make an economic development, good environmental practices, a single path for growth. Last week, I participated at a business dialogue promoted by ICC Brazil with the WTO director, Roberto Azevedo. I asked him how these sustainability practices could impact the future trade negotiations. He was crystal clear. The environmental issue is here to stay and will be crucial for every new trade agreement. This resonated widely because it's not a passing issue, and rather than avoid it, we need to fully embrace it. I agree with this view. That's why we have here with us CEOs from different businesses who will help us understand how the private sector is changing to adapt this to this moment. This conversation today will be moderated by Tânia Consentino, Microsoft CEO in Brazil and President of ICC Brazil CEOs Council. Before I turn over to Tânia, I wanted to give a special thank you to Paul Pullman. Paul is one of the greatest environmental champions of our time. He has been highlighting the importance of the role of businesses in protecting the environment and adopting sustainable practices within the business he led, long before this became a key topic on the global agenda. It is wonderful to see a CEO or professionals in general that exceed their regular functions, like Paul. It really inspires us all. And it is also a great privilege for us to meet with Jean Gereissat, who is a true symbol of the impact that next generation bring to our world. And having Carlos Takahashi, the CEO of BlackRock Brazil, it's the cherry on top of the cake. BlackRock is a global pioneer in changing the view of investment funds. Tânia, thank you for your leadership. And I'd like to let the keynote speakers take the floor and inspire our distinguished audience. Thank you all for being with us. I hope we'll have a productive and insightful discussion. Please, Tânia.
Thanks a lot, Daniel. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be the facilitator of this panel today with great speakers. Paul Pullman, one of reference and one of the most visionary leaders of his generation and great fan. And also be very happy to be here with Jean and Carlos. They with me are fighting for a more sustainable world, and I'm very happy we shared the stage last year when we were in the Plataforma Liderança Sustentável, when we was awarded as the CEO with purpose. So I really believe that the private sector and the CEOs can lead the change, the necessary change for the world. I am a CDG pioneer, Sustainable Development Goals pioneer, but I'm very frustrated to see that the advancements towards the SDGs has been slow or even reversed. In accordance to Global Compact report, climate change, loss of biodiversity, extreme poverty, and widening social and health inequalities continue to present existential threats to our future. We still have 700 million people living under extreme poverty, almost the same number with people without access to energy. At the current pace, it will take more than 257 years to cover the economic gender gap. And we are on track for 3.5 Celsius degree of temperature rise for this century. so quite difficult to reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. So I cannot be optimistic with this data. Business leaders must act now. So I used to say that we must not just be optimists, but we must be activists. So I'm very happy to hear from our panelists what they think, but not only what they think, but what they are doing to engage their companies, the society around, their supply chain, they all stakeholders, and how can we make them join us in this activism and accelerate the necessary change. I would love to start with Paul, but we have now the first 5 minutes. Paul, Jean, and Carlos will share with us their experience, their learnings, and their tips about this sustainability journey and how can we move to a low carbon economy. Paul, it's with you now.
Well, thank you, Tanya. And I don't know if I can do in 5 minutes the experience, tips, and learnings, but I'll try to make it worthwhile. And thanks, Daniel, for your kind words as well. You're such a good friend and really admire what you are doing with Susano and obviously with the business community in Brazil. I also want to thank ICC Brazil. You're relatively young, but you have over 200 members. And I just stepped down as the chair of the Global International Chambers of Commerce. But I can tell you, you have great leadership there with Daniel and a very active chamber. So I really appreciate that. The question that you posed in the beginning is most important, actually, that most people think you cannot do both things. You cannot do climate mitigation and economic growth. You cannot have a sustainable business model and be profitable. We seem to live in these trade-offs. You know, we need to build a lot of inventory to drive customer service. Or, you know, I cannot get my customers to be happy unless I extend payment terms. So all these trade-offs in business are actually putting us at a competitive disadvantage. I think we need people that can live in the and mentality, not in the or mentality. The reality, as we obviously know, is that we've waited so long, unfortunately, to address many of these planetary boundaries that we see, that the cost of not acting now is significantly higher than the cost of acting. You see that with COVID. COVID is a clear example of us exceeding planetary boundaries, encroaching on nature. Then on top of that, COVID is exposing the weakness in our social system, where the poor disproportionately suffer. It brings to life many of the shortcomings of our global economic system, unfortunately. And as a result of that, we have spent already to date over $12 trillion just to more or less stabilize the global economies. And I would believe that we need to spend at least an equal amount to come out of this. So a good example of why it is actually more important to attack these issues up front. And actually, when you do, and if you do, it's actually one of the biggest business opportunities that we can find. About 5 years ago, at the time of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and that same year, the Paris Agreement, I'm talking about the year 2015, we also created a commission, the New Climate Economy Commission, that issued a wonderful report, which was called Better Growth, Better Climate. And what the report for the first time showed, contrary to some of the accepted belief, especially amongst politicians across the world, is that in order to get better growth, you actually need to attack the climate. If we would not attack the burning issue of climate change, we would actually stifle our economic growth. And I think we see more of that happening around us. Whilst the world is preoccupied with COVID, we have major floodings, droughts, and heat waves across the world that don't even get reported, that affects hundreds of millions of people as I talk. So the two burning issues that we need to address is actually climate change and inequality. And by addressing them, we not only ensure that we can grow our economies better, but we also ensure the success and the long-term profitability of the businesses that we all operate. COVID, I think, has shown a few things very briefly. I think the first thing that COVID has shown is that you cannot have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. For the first time, people understand the relationships between the economy or our financial systems, but also our natural systems, and increasingly our social and racial systems. and how they are all related. The second element of COVID is the social part that I briefly referred to. It is actually sad to see that the people that we need most, the healthcare workers, the people that produce food for us, the transporters, etc., are the ones actually under the most fragile economic conditions. In 60% of the world, absolutely no safety net. And it has exposed the inequality even more so that we see in society. And frankly, when we have a system where too many people feel they're not participating or ultimately are excluded, these systems will rebel against itself. And that's what you're seeing across the world. The third learning from COVID, which is a very important one, is that we need our global governance system to work better. The black swan actually was not COVID. We've had SARS, we've had Ebola, we've had Zika, we've had actually pandemics, zootonic, i.e. coming from the encroachment on nature about every 3 to 5 years. I agree that this is a particularly nasty one, and we all suffer as the victims of this terrible pandemic suffer. But at the end of the day, that should not have been a surprise. The big surprise actually was the inability of governments to work together globally. When you have a global challenge like that, you need to cooperate globally and show solidarity first and foremost as citizens of planet Earth. So I think the third learning is that we need to have a better global system. And as Daniel said, having talked recently with Roberto Azevedo, I also think the WTO is obviously one that we need to include in that and see how we can make it function better. And then the final learning from the COVID crisis until now, which actually is a positive learning, is that companies that were already operating their businesses more under an environmental, social, and governance principle, more sustainably, if you want to, more longer term, more multi-stakeholder, are the companies that have done better during the crisis. And the same is true for the financial funds. 66% of the ESG funds have outperformed the non-ESG funds. And it should not be a surprise. Those companies usually have better relationships with their suppliers, a stronger financial position, a more engaged employee workforce, etc., etc. So when you get a crisis like this, they show more resilience and more agility to come out of this. So that is really why it's so key that we discuss this enormously important topic. How can we move at scale to a more sustainable and equitable future? And actually, by doing so, be all better off as well. I'll leave it here for the moment, Tanya.
Thanks a lot, Paul. No, I cannot agree more. But one interesting thing that we are talking a lot about ESG today, but it's still some companies believe are more short-term oriented, trying to please the investors, and also believes that sustainability means cost. I want now to hear from Carlos, because BlackRock is pushing it for me is a piece of hope, the letters that Larry Fink is sending to the executives every year, and the latest one, very, very strong message. So how can the big asset management companies, big investors like yours, can accelerate the change of the private sector? So share your experience, Carlos, please.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. And it's a great way to start the week, actually, to have this kind of discussion. It's really a great pleasure. Thank you very much. And talk a little bit about how BlackRock have been moving their business. I think this is a journey. The first thing that you have to consider is this is a journey that we start with a very inspirational way a long time ago with the first letter of Larry. And then year after year, you need to evolve what you're assuming. First, BlackRock assumed some positions regarding the long-term view and how we need to help people to achieve their well-being in terms of financial goals. And then you need to discuss. BlackRock discussed about purpose, go into governance, and etc. And finally, in as you mentioned, the letter of 2020 covered the climate change risk. And also, our company assumes some pragmatic targets. And the first one is to leave thermal coal companies do not invest anymore in companies of thermal coal, and also requires for a company that use thermal coal as a main resource of energy to abandon, to give to the market the transparency how do you leave this kind of the use of this kind of energy. And finally, to have ECG as a transversal factors in all of BlackRock active portfolio, and also require of index providers to include ESG factors in their indexes. This is a kind of examples of how you need to move your journey, starting for sure all the times you need to have a inspirational way to start the first step, but you need to execute. You need to really announce how you are implementing everything in your company, and also you need to follow what you're doing and give transparency for the market on what you're doing. Is that something that we did for a few months ago when you sent two letters for our shareholders? One talking about the implementation process, and other one talking about our stewardship process. We start to follow almost 300 companies that are intensive energy users, and they have a target with us to reduce their emissions. And some companies, we started following 300 companies, and something like 53 companies was not achieving their targets, and we start to vote against some CEOs that assume their companies, some directors, and etc. And we continue to observe the other 240 companies. This is a way to be a little bit more pragmatic and to execute really what we are talking about. It's like a walk to talk. And so, as I mentioned before, we need to start the inspirational way to implement the culture, to discuss the culture, etc. But at the same time, you need to go to execution to move things like ESG, like sustainability in a very consistent way. And the other thing is data. Probably you talk a little bit about data. We have now more consistent data about how ESG investments have been doing very well during the crisis, as resilience that this kind of portfolios have, and also a better performance than the same portfolio comparing with the ESG and the traditional portfolios. As we have data, we can connect ESG and economic issues, showing that we have a better portfolios if you include ESG factors.
Super, Carlos, and I love the way we are dealing with energy and giving targets to companies to reduce their energy. You have a huge potential for energy management and energy savings, more than 50% in the industry sector and almost 80% in the building sector. And this is huge. And when I was in Schneider, we used to say that the better energy is the one that we do not use. So we have to save as much as we can.
It's perfect.
We said megawatts, so no watts.
Yeah. For this reason, sometimes when you're talking about the carbon, we're not talking about the reduce or something. You're talking about the efficiency, carbon efficiency index. This is the index that we have in Brazilian Stock Exchange. And so you're totally right. It's a efficiency matter. Yeah.
And this is super important because, as I mentioned in the beginning, you have almost 1 billion people without access to energy. If you reduce inequality, we have to put those people in the grid. So we have to balance the equation, economical growth of energy consumption, while we reduce the CO2 emissions. Well, Jean, now going to you and Ambev. Ambev is super well known by its high performance culture. And another day I was in a big debate with very hot debate with some executives, because they said that high performance culture goes against sustainability. We cannot waste time taking care of some things that are not going directly to the core business. So I really want to hear from you, the journey of Ambev. And what did you learn, and how did you change the pitch and embrace it? So many beautiful projects. Ama, the water is one of them, but you have many others.
Yes. So thank you very much, Tanya. So we are surrounded by false dilemmas, old dilemmas that they simply do not stick anymore in the world that we are living now. And I will come back first to your introduction and then try to jump in on the second question. That yes, I'm a little bit frustrated, like you too, as a consumer, as a citizen, as an executive, about what the world was able to accomplish and achieve on this matter of the sustainability matter. I'm a little bit more optimistic moving forward. So we were just opening at Ambev our management trainees program, and this young generation they come with an undoubtable commitment to sustainability and doing the things right in a responsible way. So all our new partners, all this young generation comes, and it's just unavoidable in the company, these conversations and the way the company makes decision with these new talents. So I'm really optimistic about it. So it's just you cannot live in a company that is a high performance company that looks for high performance candidates, and they are all on it, on how you do it and the way you're going to do it. And if you not do it in a way that is not just that you comply with sustainability, it's that you are ahead, inspiring the others. You just don't get the talents anymore. Just for us to start the conversation there. In Ambev, so our purpose, we don't talk that much about it, but we live and we work for a purpose. And our purpose is to bring people together for a better world. So that's our purpose. We believe that beer help unite people, and when people is united, one of the most important things to talk and to evolve and to commit is for a better world. So that is our commitment. It was never so relevant as it is today, and so we are living it at an extreme. And we are, so that was there, and because of COVID and because of this new world, so we are really working better than ever on this purpose. We are so, and we are high performance companies. We try to be pragmatic. So we try to have the ideals and then transform them into metrics, and really based on that, try to move the company in the right direction. We know we work on an ecosystem that comes from the agricultural part, the barley, the plantations, and then ends in an entrepreneur that is serving beer in a bar in a city of Brazil. So we want to be protagonists on this ecosystem and really make it healthier, make it sustainable, and really prosperous, and with a responsible expansion of this ecosystem. So that's how we feel. We believe we can have performance expanding responsibly our ecosystem. And then based on that, I will let to other questions, but we have a strong commitment of 2025, 100% of Ambev's electricity coming from renewable source. So this is a commitment. We are in a journey. We will get there. That's not easy. That's worldwide. That's not Brazil, but we are really moving that direction. We just announced that we will go 100% plastic pollution free. So we will really have to get our products and get the plastic back or deteriorate the plastic, find a way to be a plastic pollution free. So that's another commitment that we had. We reduced 50% of the water usage in our company in the past years. And then we decided to launch a product that is AMA, to all the profit to give back to populations that are vulnerable in the access of water. So we have a lot of idealists coming to the company. We are transforming all these ideals in metrics, and we are moving forward. It's a journey. It's still a long way to go, but we are moving.
Thanks, Jean. I really agree with you. That is a journey. We at Microsoft, we started very focused in 2009, and then evolving year after year. And this year was a kind of big mark because we made very strong commitments, zero carbon emissions by 2030, and negative emissions, negative historical emissions by 2050. Now we are discussing about water usage, the reduction of plastic, and we are talking about circular economy in our data centers. We have millions of servers that have their life for 5 years. So what we are going to do with all this electronic garbage in the future? So we are building circular centers to recycle not only our own electronic equipment, but partners and the ecosystems. So we really want to be a zero waste company by 2030. So very strong commitment that requires a very strong focus, a lot of work behind that. But we cannot do this alone because we, Microsoft, and you guys are one company, but we have a big ecosystems of partners, suppliers around us. And I heard a lot that sustainability is for those big multinational companies. I'm a small companies, I cannot afford that. So more than give the targets to our suppliers, how can we really engage and help them, the suppliers and partners, to embrace, and you, especially you that have a small retail shopping in the almost the middle of nowhere in Brazil, but we also have big machine suppliers. So how can we engage our stakeholders, but our partners and our supply chain in the ESG commitments we do? Because we cannot neglect the impact of our own supply chain. So I want to start from Carlos and then Jean and finish with Paul. And then I want that Paul share your experience with Imagine, how Imagine is helping on that.
For sure, Tanya, I think in our case in the financial market, for sure, we have a lot of players, a lot of connections. For example, to move the market, you have to have you need to think about the issuers adopting ESG criteria. You need to think about the researchers doing the same. We need to think about auditory companies doing the same, audit companies doing the same. And so I think the challenge that you have is really to connect all of ecosystem players. And in this case, companies like investment managers like BlackRock in our case, and the companies like Ambev, like Microsoft, that have a very huge network, have a great relevance to influence those companies to adopt sustainable issues in their companies. And so I think this is something that we are trying to do at BlackRock. We are, especially in our case, as a great player in the ETF space, exchange traded funds, whose I index as a base for their management. I think what we are doing is exactly to try to influence in a good way, because it's an education process. Sometimes we have the discussion which way is the best one, to be a kind of adopt like exclusion process, to be a more activist, or etc. For sure, both way is very relevant, but if you think in a long-term way, you have to think about education. You need to educate all of our stakeholders, including, in this case that I mentioned, for example, the index providers as a suppliers for us. We need to try to influence, but also to educate them to use ESG factors, for example, in their indexes.
Thanks, Carlos. Jean?
So I was thinking about this ecosystem, and I can frame it in three different perspectives. One, it is that So I was so surprised with some of our suppliers when we open up for example, for the commitment on the plastic. So we said we want to go, and how many good suppliers we had with a good pipeline of innovation, of things that would be developed, but with not that much traction in customers. And then when we make the commitment, when we learn about their pipeline, we felt confident to make the commitment because we had good suppliers that with some commitment, sometime would develop so much amazing things. So I think this is a relation of when you have so much complex problems. It's really not about you solving the problems. It's really about collaborating and really putting the problem outside of the relation and then try to solve it in a complex way with an ecosystem of suppliers, startups, companies, commitments. And so I was so impressed with that, specifically on the plastic. And so that was an example. A second example is that, so this renewable energy bet that we have 2025 to have 100% of our energy coming from renewable sources in the world. So this is when we talk with our customers, so we see traction, we see that they want, they don't know how, and they are small. And that what we are doing in that direction is that we are leveraging our possibilities, our critical mass, our power, if you may say, to really create models to transfer the possibility of the renewable dream for our customers. So we will announce at some point in time in the short term an investment on some startups to reduce drastically customer acquisition of the startups and increase how easy would be the cost of switch of our customers to the renewable source. So we are in the middle trying to make a bridge of things that because of our critical mass we are able to do and our customers are not able to do. So this is a type of way how can we evolve. And then we have 1 million customers, and that we really can make a change and accelerate everything that is there. The third thing is that we talked a lot about inequality too, and we are on this journey of making a commitment on the racial part of it. So we are many diversity. We can talk about gender, we can talk about the racial. We have many perspectives on that. Specifically on the racial is something on the race is something that we want to make a step up. We really believe that we should put a lot of efforts on education and capabilities in the beginning of the career, in the company, attract and then develop in the beginning of the career. And then we want to do this in a way that, so we are no benchmark for anyone, but we have a desire and we want to bring our suppliers in the ecosystem with the same mindset. So we are making this study, what we want to do and the direction and the commitments, and we are bringing our suppliers to really look what I'm doing. I would love if you would go in the same direction. I cannot enforce you because I'm still not there as an example, but I really would like you to partner and come with us in this journey. So these are 3 types of perspective and approaches that we are leveraging to improve the world.
Oh.
Yeah, it's good to hear these great examples from both BlackRock and Ambev, and obviously you need to use your size and scale, and that is your responsibility to ensure that your whole value chain lives up to the standards that you set, because ultimately you would be held accountable. If you sell your beer, you'll be held accountable how the people in your value chain are treated, how you source your products, if it's sustainable or not. If you're a BlackRock, you'll be held accountable that the companies that you invest in are actually driving to the right direction. So I think the influence that big companies have on these smaller SMEs is enormous. Unilever had 80 to 120,000 SMEs directly attached to their value chain. Which brings me to a few points I want to make, which are important. The first one is the global economy is actually not big companies. The global economy is SMEs. In most countries in the world, 80 to 90, 95% of their economies are SMEs. So on the one hand, these SMEs have an advantage to be very agile, and they can adapt to new opportunities that come up much quicker than some of these big companies can do it. But on the other hand, it's also clear that coming out of COVID, these SMEs have been hit especially hard. They often don't have that resilience that some of the bigger companies have. So for that reason, the International Chambers of Commerce, which represents about 48 million SMEs, is working very hard with the G20 and governments around the world to be sure that there is financing in the value chain. So the first thing we need to really do is ensure that these SMEs in our value chain have a chance to survive out of this crisis. The second thing we need to do is, coming back to my previous comment, many companies still think that they can outsource supply chains and also outsource responsibility. That doesn't work anymore. CSR still deals with scope 1 and scope 2 of your responsibilities, basically the things under your own control. But the citizens of this world will not be satisfied with that. You have to take responsibility for your total impact, which means if you're a Facebook, you can say my purpose is bringing people together, but if you don't take responsibility for the hate speech that is on their websites, then the public goes after you. For any company, you can say, yeah, I'm there to deliver, let's say Amazon, I'm there to deliver products to my customers in a lower cost way. But if you don't take responsibility for the way you treat your people or the carbon emission, it will backfire on you. And interestingly now, most companies are seeing that pressure coming, actually more from their employees than from society at large. So once more, you cannot outsource your value chain and at the same time outsource your responsibilities. This brings me to the importance of taking responsibility of your total value chain. In Unilever, we created a responsible sourcing code already about 10 years ago, where we would work with suppliers to slowly bring them up to the levels that we would like to be held accountable for. And what we found was that as we work with these suppliers, bring our methodologies, our technologies, our data and insights to bear, that they actually become more agile, more competitive, and actually benefit as much from your growth as a business as you do. So it's very important that. And then finally, I think that for the smaller SMEs, there are ways to get together. You can go to the ICC, to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. You can become a member of the UN Global Compact, and you have to your availability many of the tools and tricks, if you want to, that you need to be successful. And most of the companies actually are making actively use of that and seeing the benefits. Coming to Imagine, there is a problem a little bit in this world. And the problem is very simply all of us. We know what we need to do. We all know that climate change is not a good thing. Few exceptions perhaps, but most people know. We all know that the social inequality is not going to get us that far either. And that's one of the other burning issues that we need to attack. We know that gender equality, you've said 257 years before we would have gender equality. I haven't met anybody that says that's a good thing. So we know what needs to be done. We're broadly moving in the right direction, even before COVID, but we're simply not going fast enough. And the reason we're not going fast enough is that we're working within systems that are pushing back, that we are thinking incrementalism versus discontinuous. And what Imagine is trying to do is to bring companies together in value chains to actually unlock some of the systems changes that are needed. If I'm a CEO, like when I was a CEO in Unilever, it was very difficult for me to go to sustainable vanilla because I wasn't a big supplier. It is very difficult for me to get the human rights standards in your value chain to the right levels if it's only you doing that. So often the CEOs of the bigger companies have to set priorities. They might not have the knowledge, they might not have the time, but also they might not be able to move the system. What we're doing with Imagine, by bringing by category about 25 to 30% of the CEOs together, we can actually move things forward faster at scale and create tipping points. The companies that participate see the direct effects and benefits. There are not really that many trade-offs. Once we get to that critical mass, we see other companies wanting to join us, and we see actually governments also being interested to help put the right frameworks, regulations in place to move it forward. I give you a very, very quick example. We put 67 companies together in the fashion industry. The fashion industry, unfortunately, is the second most polluting industry after fossil fuel. And the numbers, the trend, as you would call it, is not your friend. We are consuming more and more fast fashion. It's one of the bigger polluters of plastics in the ocean with microfibers. Very destructive the way cotton is grown for our biodiversity. Labor standards, as you've seen in India and Bangladesh, that we would not wish on any of our family members. So that industry needs to change. But yet, for each of these individual companies, it is impossible to go to regenerative cotton or to achieve the Paris agreements by themselves or to get out of single-use plastics. Imagine putting them together is able to accelerate that. We're now working with about 30 companies in food. It's the CEOs of the biggest food companies. And the issue we attacked immediately was food security in East Africa, where you have climate change, the locusts, the COVID, all coming together. And we were heading for a big disaster. In fact, David Beasley, who runs the World Food Program, is estimating that we double the number of people that are in acute food shortage. By putting the whole value chain together, we could deal with the government, which is difficult for each individual company. It sometimes wears you out. We could look at issues across the whole value chain, which is usually where the discontinuous things come from. And we could rally the resources together to quickly intervene. We're doing the same now with the European Green Deal, with Frans Timmermans and van der Leyen, to be sure that that also gets implemented in a proper way. And we're obviously also looking as a whole industry to sustainable sourcing. Agriculture is probably, the way we do now, agriculture is probably 25% of the climate change issues that we see. But on the positive side, it's also 30% of the solution. In Microsoft, your wonderful company that you now represent, you need to get carbon credits to make your whole system, and actually going back to 1977, as you mentioned rightfully. So you need to get carbon positive. Amazon has just made a commitment to do the same thing. These companies will be looking for carbon credit. Why can't we invent agriculture that is actually carbon positive? Why can't we decarbonize our electricity systems? In 60-70% of the world, wind and solar is already cheaper than fossil fuel. So creating these carbon markets, if you want to, gives an enormous opportunity to actually work with people in our value chains and make them carbon positive. If I would be in MBEV's value chain and I would make barley or any other ingredients, I want to be zero destructive to the environment. I want to actually be carbon positive and get credits from Microsoft that then ensure that I'm not a subsistent farmer. Of the 860 million people who still go to bed hungry every day in this world, not even knowing if they wake up the next day, are usually subsistent monocrop farmers. They're stunted because they don't get enough nutrition. They are very volatile because of climate change. They are volatile on their incomes and they get the biggest hits. So if we can turn that upside down and provide in our value chains a decent livelihood, especially for those people, I think we go a long way into making this world work. And if we do it carbon positive, we attack one of the biggest issues that we currently have to face. So these are examples that you can do. And these are examples where Imagine is focused on these broader global systems changes.
Thanks, Paul.
I may comment.
Yes, sure.
Amazing contributions. And it's good to see these three sectors, finance, industrial, and now Imagine, the consulting view of Pullman. I see two trends and dealing with the example of plastics. One trend is innovation. So how we can create new solutions, and Suzano is leading a position in this field with a commitment to substitute 10 million tons by 2030 of substituting plastic, 10 million tons of plastic, from wood source. And I see another trend, which is dealing with what we have today on the market. So there's a very interesting initiative in the United States called reuseplastic.org, which consolidates the major oil companies and plastic consumers to turn all plastics consumed in US by 2030 reusable, recyclable, or recoverable. So this kind of movement engage society. And if we bring together new solutions to operate and innovation, we'll be facing a better world, a healthier world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's true. And it is a pity when you see, so plastic is a huge disaster, but when you go to food shortage, it's a pity to see that we are throwing to waste almost 30% of everything we produce in terms of food. And the other hand, we have a lot of people that go to the bed without food and don't know if they have something in the following day. So technology could, if you connect all ecosystems, we could manage this better. The same, I agree with Paul that we have to become carbon neutral, but how can we connect different companies that have different intensity in some terms of CO2 emissions, and then create a net positive world. So we really need to work more connected. And I think if I can summarize what you three said, that sustainability is a journey. So our companies are learning on the way. We need to engage our supply chain and partners. And you mentioned education. So it's not a matter of enforce the supply chain, but we need to educate. And as Paul did, Unilever, share the learnings, the data, the insights. You spoke about collaboration. We have to work together, a lot of innovation and support. I think this is a kind of pragmatic, could be a tip. How could we engage not only our own supply chain, but small, medium-sized companies that are running and pushing our economy? We have a lot of questions, but we have just 10 minutes to go. And I have something that we say that climate change, resilience strategies, and climate crisis mitigation are traditionally a public sector responsibility. However, unfortunately, in some nations, and especially our nations today, the government does not act accordingly, causing economic loss and negative impacts in the private sector, actually in the whole economy itself. In this context, how do you see the role of investors, companies, and institutions like ICC? How could we help government that have big shortage of money these days of the COVID crisis? And how can we help them to give the right level of attention and to take the right measures related to sustainability? If you could start with Carlos.
Yes, I think, yeah, you're totally right. And one of the reasons that Larry wrote in his letter in 2019 is exactly what you said. Larry saw at that time that the government was not strong enough to manage all of things that they have to manage. And for sure, private sector have to be more active in the sustainable issues, exactly because the government has not doing well in this space. And I think, especially in the investment space, what you're seeing now is the price of the risk. We are pricing everything. The financial markets have been starting to price everything. And you mentioned about the flows, for example, of investments in each country. And day after day, if you do not show that you're doing well, that you're managing well environment, social, and for sure governance issues, because governance is something that really matters for the public sector also. If you're not doing well, probably we will be penalized with the inflows of investors and etc. And so I think this is something that you need to show in a very clear numbers, because this is a very pragmatic issue, and this is the way that we can help. This is we have some ways to learn the lessons. Sometimes is with the pain, sometimes with the love, but we have to be through awareness. This is something that I really believe that we can. This is a way to help. Unfortunately.
Thanks, Carlos. Paul?
Well, it's very clear that we cannot have any business on a dead planet, and climate change is affecting all of us. Most of the emissions are actually the emissions that come from us producing our products. So we have a responsibility to ensure that our models are not only carbon neutral, but actually we've overshot the targets already. And I think the companies will soon discover they have to be what I would call carbon positive, and it's in everybody's interest. What do companies need to do? First of all, in their own operations, they need to implement, as I said, scope 1 and 2, their policies to get to zero emission. We now see in most of the industries, including heavy emitters like steel or aluminum or airlines, we already see the leaders coming in with zero emission plans in line with the Paris Agreement, which is net zero by 2050. The other thing you have to do is to be sure that you not only implement the Paris Agreements into your business models, or ideally earlier, but that you also put a price on carbon. We treasure what we measure. Companies that have an internal price on carbon, or economies at national or subnational level with an internal price on carbon, tend to actually do better. Others that have still the preferred subsidies or don't do this actually are becoming less and less competitive. You also see that bifurcation happening in the financial markets. And then the third thing, which is equally important, is to be sure that you disclose your carbon-related risks in your value chain. We have the task force that Mike Carney and Bloomberg are leading, and that has now over $100 trillion of money under management looking at that. Price on carbon, science-based targets to be at the Paris Agreements, and disclosure. And then from a business point of view, when you have your own house in order, you do it with your suppliers in your value chain, you do it with your industry as a sector to get the bigger bang for your buck if you want to. And then last but not least, you have to go into advocacy. It is now very clear that in most places in the world, including Brazil, but the same in the US or in Europe and many other places, big parts of the private sector are running ahead of the governments. The governments are a little bit stuck in their own countries, in their own little circles in the next election cycle. And you could not expect anymore the big discontinuities on climate change to actually come from governments. They will come from technology, they will come from demand from the citizens, and they will come from companies themselves stepping up because of the different pressures, because of the economic sense that it makes, because of the financial market pushing them. But that is what is currently happening, and it's going pretty quickly. So for businesses to go together and advocate for governments to change is probably the best way to get governments to move. I call it de-risking the political process. A great example of that, my last sentence, is Europe with the Green Deal, where together with the citizens of Europe, with many people in the private sector, we've put together a good circular economy package, and we have the targets for Europe that we're pushing increasingly towards the Paris Agreements. We also see that this is the region where a lot of the bailout money that is now being used to get out of the COVID crisis is actually going to green recovery and not to the fossil recovery. One of the biggest issues that we will be facing coming out of COVID is unemployment. It's going up in Brazil quite rapidly. It's going up in all places in the world quite rapidly. And unfortunately, it's the young people again that pay disproportionately the price, and may I say women as well. What is very clear is that in order to maintain this social cohesion and to create the jobs, Any study that you see, study after study, points to investing in a greener economy, restoring our biodiversity, retrofitting our buildings, electrifying our grid system with green energy, moving to green mobility, and so forth. All these investments cost less money, make the economy more resilient, and create more and better jobs. In Brazil alone, we just recently did a study, and getting out of COVID immediately could lift the economy, create over 2 million jobs if we actually focus on these areas that I just mentioned. And that is true for most, if not all, countries in the world that we're currently looking at.
Love that. Jean?
Just to give me one phrase after the important words of Paul and Carlos, I will get from the end. During this COVID, we saw a massive exponential effect, that it was the collaboration among companies, among communities, among government. It is something that we should never forget, and we should evolve from that point on. It was so because COVID was so drastic enemy, and so we saw competitors in the market. So we had a movement here in Brazil with Ambev, Coke, Heineken, and all the other companies that they usually compete in the market, compete for targets, compete for everything. And then we put us together to help the recovery of the small trade. So this mindset of collaboration is really something that we should not forget after this COVID crisis. And the institutes, foundations like ICC, executives, founders have the responsibility to step up and really help to lead the conversation of the society about the sustainability, about everything. So not just the collaboration, but stepping up and advocating for what's right is really something that we should never forget. It helped it very well. It happened in a different way during the pandemic.
Thanks, Jean. I'd like to hear from Daniel about your perception as executive and chairman of ICC.
Well, it's wonderful to see the whole number of initiatives and changing businesses. And we finally can see the change from blah, blah, blah to walk the talk. And I invite you all to join ICC and use ICC as a platform to advocate your views, your beliefs in Brazil, and with the possibility to influence worldwide, whether ICC is present in 90 countries and major institutions. And we have 9 different areas of working in ICC Brazil to build a better business environment. So thank you, and pleasure to be here with you.
Thanks, Daniel. So we are about to end. Unfortunately, I would stay here hours with you. It was a big learning for me, but we are now on time to finish, so I will close. And first, thank you, Paul, Jean, Carlos, to be here with us. Thanks for your time, and I'm super grateful for the learnings I have today. Thanks, Daniel, and the team of ICC to organize this great discussion. I'm very happy to see the engagement of private sector represented by you. I love to see the engagement of Paul leading the SDG and leading discussions for many, many years. I want to mention in the last letter sent by Larry Fink, he mentioned something that I'm almost at the same level, because after many, many years in the market, he said, over 40 years of career in finance, I have witnessed a number of financial crises and challenges. So do I. But those are short-term in nature. Climate change is different. Even if only a fraction of the projected impact is realized, this is much more structured long-term crisis. So I think this is one thing very important that we all have to understand. And the cost of not doing nothing will be much bigger than the cost to act now. So what I love, he finished saying companies, investors, and government must prepare for a significant relocation of capital. So we must act now. And I really agree with you all, and especially with Paul at the end, when he said that sustainability or a journey towards a low carbon economy is one of the biggest business opportunities we have in front of us. So let's lead this change. I love also that you all agree that we as executives should advocate. So we should be a voice not only inside our company, our ecosystem, but also outside. We have institutions like ICC that can help not only the large companies, but even more the small, medium-sized companies in those journeys. So let's work together, let's collaborate, let's share data, because we do have technology to help us to reach our targets. What we need is more people, more companies embracing the planet, because we cannot have a health economy in a dead planet. So thank you all. I'm very grateful for this morning, and I wish you great day, and hopefully our planet will get better soon. Thanks.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Carlos.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Gabriela,
Bye.
thank you, Leonardo. Bye-bye.
Gabriela, tá aqui ainda?
Oi, Tânia.
E aí? Nossa, eu não queria parar mais, gente. Tinha perguntas.
Muito bom, né?
Mas os caras são... Amei.
Muito boa. Muito boa a discussão. E é o que você falou. Dava para